All right, welcome. Well, this is a whole heck of a lot more than I had my first hour. You know, I had 2 virtual students, and that was it. That was it. And so I felt like singing the Three Dog Night song, One is the Loneliest Number. Yeah, it's a coordinated senior skip day in that all 3 high schools are on it. I was aware of it because I do have a daughter who is a senior as well. So she kind of like gave us the word on the street, Mom and Dad, on Friday. You know, what's out there on social media. And I'm like, I'm not shocked, not surprised by any means, all that. So here we go. So you really are like my first hour for today. I'm actually teaching because styles. Oh, I guess we'll just make it a work day. But I'm kind of used to that. You know, that comes with the territory of being also a senior teacher. So, all right. So with that, how was our weekend? It was a good one, wasn't it? Did we get outside? Yeah, any fun activities outside that we can speak of? Did we play golf? A little bit of golf. All right. Anyone partake in the fishing opener? How about that? No one engaging in the fishing opener. Well, I was on the water, but I was kayaking. But I did not. It's one of the few moments in which I did not throw a line in the fish on fishing opener. Instead, my wife and I, we went kayaking, which in many ways, that felt like my first hour today, in that on the lake, it was myself, my wife, and one other boat. We went up to Square Lake, Minnesota, or Square Lake. So not too many people out there on the lake. All right. Anything else? Anyone else? Any big highlights? You did put it in the chat as well. All right. So here we are. We are getting near we're at the midway mark of trimester 3.2. So it's just going to kind of go, it will go quicker and all that. So the important thing is just stay on top of the assignments. Reach out if you have questions or concerns, because before we know it, it's going to be done. All right. So with that, today, I want to take a few minutes here once again to kind of get us back into the groove and look at finishing up the origins, tactics, and organization, so the OTO. And some of you are finishing up, but today it is due. And so if you do not turn it today, we are doing it on paper, or I'll take it first thing tomorrow. If you're at home, of course, take video or take pictures of it and submit it that way as well. Same here, you can do the same thing as well. I do have a video clip here I want to highlight, Charles Hamilton Houston. But before I get to Charles Hamilton Houston, I did go to the History Center yesterday. So besides kayaking over the weekend, I did go to the History Center yesterday, and they had an exhibit on women in Minnesota. And there were a number of women that were being spotlighted in that new exhibit that were what we'll consider civil rights activists prior to the civil rights movement. And so their role in whether or not campaigning for anti-lynching, which is a big part, but also perhaps organizing labor. Labor organizations will be open to civil rights issues. Not all of the organizations, but some of them will take it on, and then also politics. Early on, some political groups will be champion for civil rights. Maybe not the Democrats and the Republicans yet, but some of those third parties will be willing to take on the issue as well. So if you get a chance, that would be an exhibit to check out as well. All right, getting back here. Charles Hamilton Houston. Now, on your list as organizations and leaders, he is recognized as one that Poseidon and I had put down for organization and leaders. He is a lawyer, and so that's going to speak a little bit to what he thinks is perhaps a path, right? And he's going to have a far-reaching impact at that time, prior to 1945, but then also after 1945 with the influence that he's going to have on some future jurists as well, like Thurgood Marshall would be an example. I've got a video clip here on Charles Hamilton Houston, his legal challenge against Jim Crow. So I would like us to just watch this little 7-minute clip here, and then we'll go from that. All right, so let me.
For 20 years, the NAACP had been crusading against lynching. Now, after years of lobbying, protests, and marching, support for a federal law slowly gained momentum. By 1938, 70% of Americans expressed support for an anti-lynching bill. For Walter White, it was time to increase pressure on Congress.
The same arguments that were made by Southern Dixiecrats and senators then are the same arguments you hear now. No, this is going to empower the federal government. It's got to be states' rights. You're taking away the autonomy of the states. The 11th Amendment, states and individuals have to be protected from this kind of federal intrusion. Don't take away our states' rights.
Walter White, not having any luck with senators on the fence, goes to Eleanor Roosevelt and says, you got to help me here. You got to get the president to speak out on this. But I think that Walter really confused being near people with power with having access to power himself. And ultimately, he was disappointed time and again when Franklin Roosevelt wouldn't come through with his promises. When Eleanor Roosevelt, who was extraordinarily influential, couldn't deliver.
The president was frankly unwilling to challenge the Southern leadership. I did not choose the tools with which I must work, he told me. If I come out for the anti-lynching bill, they will block every bill I ask Congress to pass. I just can't take that risk. Walter White.
When the federal anti-lynching bill is put before Congress in 1938, it is filibustered to death.
Walter White would have continued to fight for an anti-lynching law in perpetuity, but for Charles Houston's arguments that the law is never going to pass, don't be so focused on this particular campaign, look at how the NAACP could grow in other areas.
Charles Houston wanted to emphasize to Walter White that there was already civil rights legislation and law available. Officers of the law were not supposed to subject persons to loss of life or deprivation of rights. It is a matter of the lives of African Americans being valued.
Houston knew that the Constitution, properly understood and rightly applied, would give Black Americans the freedom they were fighting for. So he took the fight to the courts.
My grandfather saw the courts as the ideal way to achieve equality, because if you fought that fight and you won, well, then it would be a legitimate victory, and it would be one that would be recognized by everyone and would have the weight of authority behind it.
Their hope was to build towards some Supreme Court decisions that would begin to turn the tide and open the way towards challenging segregation in education. And so he had a strategy.
Charles Houston, having his training from Harvard Law School, understood that judges are not going to make decisions that will overturn rulings having to do with constitutional interpretation unless absolutely necessary. So it was Charles Houston who became the strategist and the architect for a campaign that would gradually dismantle the precedent of Plessy versus Ferguson, the 1896 separate but equal doctrine.
So they began to carefully pick cases that they would litigate, pick cases to win.
And cases that would establish precedent. Cases that, in Charles Houston's words, would make plain the inequality that existed in the educational opportunities of blacks and whites, and would make true equality too expensive for states to maintain. In 1936, Houston and his legal team would find a case with all the right components. Lloyd Gaines, a college graduate, had been denied entrance to the law school at the University of Missouri because of his race. Houston argued that Missouri was obligated to either build a law school for blacks equal to that of whites or admit him to the University of Missouri.
Gaines became the first time when the United States Supreme Court was asked expressly, does a state have an obligation to provide professional education to people of color if there is no professional education available within that state? And the court said yes, and they ordered the University of Missouri to allow Lloyd Gaines to be admitted, and it was incredibly influential.
The Gaines case laid the groundwork for Houston's master plan. It would become the basis for the legal battles that would one day bring an end to legalized Jim Crow in America. But this one victory would not be enough for Charles Hamilton Houston. Over the years to come, Houston would pursue cases at every level, fighting against segregation in all aspects of American society.
He saw himself as a soldier who needed to work 20 hours a day, and he did so very, very often.
My grandfather had no tolerance for slackers or laziness or excuses. He believed in getting it done no matter the personal cost.
I think my father saw himself as a soldier, as a fighter in a long campaign against injustice. He did not stint in his hours or in his travel or in his legal preparation, despite the fact that his health was declining.
After suffering 2 heart attacks, on April 22nd, 1950, Charles Hamilton Houston died.
My father, on his deathbed in the hospital, was given a book written by the attorney Louis Nizer entitled Peace of Mind, and that in the margin of one of the pages of that book, he inscribed to me the message, tell Bo, which was my pet name as a boy, that I did not run out on him, but that in every fight, some fall.
He died in 1950, so he wasn't around when the historic victories came to light. He wasn't visible during the civil rights movement, even during Brown, and because of that, he was, in too many quarters, largely forgotten. But make no mistake, he is the architect. He transformed the legal culture within this country. That kind of courage is essentially what transformed this country. Unless there were a handful of black folks who, after being beat down, were willing to stand up and say, my head is bloodied but not bowed, it would not be possible to imagine change.
Okay, so again, when we think of the civil rights movement, we have those recognizable names out there that we kind of gravitate towards, or always seem to be talked about. Martin Luther King is mentioned, sometimes Johnny O. Lewis, Rosa Parks. But I think what we're going to find out as we continue to examine the civil rights movement, there are going to be a lot of individuals who do play a role and sometimes is not known. 2 individuals were mentioned in this video. One of them is obviously Charles Hamilton Houston, but then also another guy that I share a common name with, Walter White, as well. But their tactics are different in terms of approaching civil rights. Walter White is looking more at legislation, where Charles Houston is looking more at litigation, lawsuits. Both of them are effective in their own way tactics and will have a degree of success. But it's going to need to be a combination of them in order for really success to happen. All right. But when we look at Charles Hamilton Houston, his tactic was to go through the legal system, the court system. Because his main argument brought up in there is that we have laws on the books that already tell us that, you know, people are equal. But what's the problem? Laws are on the books that tell us that we're equal, but what's the problem? Have we picked up on the problem or problems? Separation. All right, there's separation because the arguments of states' rights, which is today, has gone away, but the issue of states' rights can be used for multiple things. But then also enforcement of those laws. Who enforces federal laws? Do we know? This might be a good one because it could be on a civics test that you have to take next year. Who enforces federal laws? Let's talk about this. Which branch of the federal government is supposed to enforce federal laws? Judicial, what's the job of the court system? Or like anything, a case is brought before a judge, before the court, what happens? They make a ruling, right? They decide, all right? But, so they make a decision, but a judge doesn't enforce it. What's the job of the legislature? To make laws, process of elimination. Who has to execute the laws? The president, the executive branch. So they are the enforcers. They have to execute and enforce the laws. And so, but in Houston's case here, he's like, let's get the courts to rule on the law and force the federal government to enforce it then. And so he picks cases. He picked cases at different levels in order to challenge Jim Crow and these separation laws and to get the federal government to do their job. He's going to have success. Doesn't mean, might not be, the big, oh my gosh, success really until Brown v. Board versus Board of Education. And he's already passed away by then. But slowly it's being taken down because if anything in this country, we always talk about contracts, we always talk about laws, is it legal and all that stuff. He's using the tactics. And he's going to create a army of lawyers. And I use the word army because many of these individuals feel that they are soldiers, that they are soldiers for a movement. We'll hear that over and over and over again when we look at other people being involved in this movement as well. They look at themselves as, I may not be fighting in Vietnam, or I may not be fighting in Korea, but they look at themselves as fighting at home as soldiers. So that's another thing that, in some ways, when we try to understand this movement, or at least kind of come to terms with it, how people view themselves is a big part. All right. So when I look at Charles Hamilton Houston, I think he is a giant here, and there'll be a lot of others that fit into this category as well. All right. Last point, 1938, they tried to have that anti-lynching law passed, but Franklin D. Roosevelt pulls it out because he needs support for his New Deal programs, as well as we're starting to gear up, even though we're not being active in European affairs. In 1938, a guy with a little mustache is going crazy, starting to go a little crazy in Europe. Adolf Hitler. Of course, you have the rise of Benito Mussolini as well. And some countries are feeling threatened, and there was a civil war in Spain. And of course, there's a lot of action, a lot of drama going on in the Asia Pacific area as well. So 1938, we're dealing with civil rights here at home. We're dealing with the Great Depression at home, but also there is some authoritarian, totalitarian actions going on around the world. So again, it's important to know those historical context pieces as well. But 1938, we don't get the anti-lynching law legislation passed. And so one could say that is contributing to why we don't have one today, perhaps. All right, so with that, your OTO, the Origins, Tactics, and Organization, it is due today, because today is Monday the 17th. All right, is there any things that need to get clarified at this point? How many articles are we looking for? At least 9, yes, because we have 3 categories. You have 3 in each of those categories. So we're looking at a total of 9. All right. And a variety of articles, styles of articles to go along with it. And be sure that you are answering the BHQ. So the BHQ isn't part of the 9, so realistically, I suppose 10. We're looking for a grand total of 10. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? Those at home, you got any comments? Whew. Tough crowd. All right. So with that being said, let's maximize the time. Let's utilize this time to get this thing done and submitted. So with that, those that are here, let's work at it. Those at home, you can exit and work on this and have a good day.